Millionaire disguises himself as a waiter and enters his own hotel. A week later, he is horrified when... What dark secrets are hidden behind the hotel's polished facade? What drives a wealthy man to disguise himself and infiltrate his own empire? How far will he go to uncover the truth? Who is he really up against in this high-stakes game of deception? Discover the shocking truths that lie beneath the surface. Are you ready to uncover the mystery? Don't miss the unraveling story. I never thought I'd find myself here, standing in the cramped, cluttered back room of my own hotel, staring at the reflection of a stranger in the mirror. The name tag I fumbled with read Matthew Walker, but the man in the mirror bore little resemblance to the person I'd been for most of my life. Just days ago, I was Matthew Anderson, a billionaire who commanded respect with a mere glance, surrounded by the luxury of my penthouse office, with its leather chairs and a skyline view that made the world seem like a chessboard waiting for my next move. Now I was just another nameless, faceless worker in a plain white shirt and a black vest that felt 2 sizes too small. The contrast was jarring, and the unfamiliarity of it all left a cold pit in my stomach. But there was no turning back. My empire, built on ambition, calculated risks, and an unwavering pursuit of excellence, was crumbling beneath me. The signs were subtle at first: a few discontented guests, a couple of negative reviews, whispers of declining service standards. I had dismissed them, confident that my trusted team would handle such minor issues. But as the months wore on, the reports grew more alarming. Unclean rooms, unhappy guests, and a staff that seemed more disillusioned by the day. The glossy reports my managers handed me were nothing but well-crafted lies, obscuring the rot that had taken root in the very heart of my business. It was time to descend from my ivory tower and confront the reality I had long ignored. The decision to go undercover wasn't one I made lightly. I knew the risks. If anyone recognized me, the whole charade would be over before it began. But there was no other way. I needed to see the truth with my own eyes, to experience firsthand the conditions that had led to the slow decay of my beloved empire. So I handed over the reins of the business to my most trusted advisor, donned the uniform of a waiter, and checked into my own hotel as Matthew Walker, a man who, in many ways, didn't exist. If anyone could uncover the truth, it had to be me. Or so I desperately hoped. The dining room was a sea of tables, some already occupied by guests sipping their morning coffee, others waiting to be set up for the breakfast rush. I had expected to feel out of place, but the sense of disorientation was more overwhelming than I had anticipated. The elegant chandeliers that once added a touch of class to this space now felt like harsh spotlights, illuminating the cracks in the facade I had worked so hard to maintain. "Hey, new guy." A voice pulled me out of my thoughts. I turned to see a tall, burly man with a clipboard in hand, his face set in a permanent scowl. He looked like someone who had seen it all, and had little patience for anything new. "You must be the new waiter they just hired. Name's Mike. I'm the shift supervisor," he said, his tone clipped and businesslike. "Yeah, that's me, Matthew Walker," I replied, forcing a smile that felt as awkward as the clothes I was wearing. Mike barely glanced at me before ticking something off his list. "Great, great. We're short-staffed today, as usual. You'll be on breakfast service. It's a madhouse, so keep up and don't get in the way." His eyes narrowed as he looked me up and down, clearly skeptical of my ability to handle the chaos that was about to unfold. "You ever done this kind of work before?" he asked, the doubt evident in his voice. "Not exactly," I admitted, keeping my answer vague. "But I'm a quick learner." Mike snorted, a sound that was equal parts disbelief and disdain. "We'll see about that," he muttered, shoving a stack of menus into my hands. "Guests here are high maintenance, and management's no better. One slip-up, and you'll be out on your ass." I nodded, slipping the menus under my arm as Mike turned and barked orders to a couple of waitresses who were frantically preparing for the breakfast rush. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. This was it. No more cushy board meetings or delegating problems from a distance. I was in the trenches now, and the reality of it hit me harder than I'd anticipated. As I stepped out into the dining room, I couldn't help but notice the little things that were off. The chipped paint on the walls, the burnt-out bulbs that hadn't been replaced, the worn-down expressions on the faces of my employees. These were things that would never have been tolerated in the hotels I had envisioned when I first started out. The place looked tired, and so did the people who worked here. The door to the kitchen swung open, and a middle-aged woman with graying hair struggled to carry a tray full of plates. Her face was flushed, and sweat beaded on her forehead as she navigated the crowded space. Instinctively, I rushed over to help, taking the tray from her hands before she dropped it. "Thanks," she breathed, her voice thick with exhaustion, as she glanced up at me with tired eyes. "You must be the new guy. Matthew, was it?" "That's right," I said, setting the tray down on the stand beside her. "Just started today." "I'm Helen," she said, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. "Been here 15 years. It's a tough gig, but it pays the bills. Just stay out of Andrew's way, and you'll be fine." "Andrew?" I asked, curiosity piqued. She nodded towards the far corner of the room, where a man in a sharp suit was speaking with a guest, his face a mask of forced politeness. "General manager," she explained, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He's the one who's got everyone on edge. Cuts corners wherever he can, but God forbid we say anything about it." I watched Andrew for a moment, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes, the way his posture screamed impatience even as he pretended to be attentive. I'd heard about him before, strict, unyielding, and always looking out for the bottom line. If there was one person who could be at the heart of my hotel's problems, it was him. "Thanks for the heads up, Helen," I said, filing away the information. "I'll keep that in mind." "No problem," she replied, grabbing another tray. "Just remember, this place might wear you down, but the people are good. Don't let Andrew ruin that for you." I nodded, but my mind was already racing. I wasn't just here to blend in. I was here to fix things. And from the looks of it, that was going to take a lot more than just observing. The morning rush hit like a tidal wave, and I found myself right in the thick of it. As a waiter, I was on my feet from the moment I clocked in, navigating the crowded dining room, balancing trays and dodging harried coworkers. The hotel lobby bustled with guests checking in and out, and the constant chatter filled the air. In my past life as Matthew Anderson, I'd only ever seen this kind of chaos from a distance. Today, though, I was in the eye of the storm, and the reality of hotel work was nothing like the polished reports I'd been reading for years. By the time I served my 10th table of the morning, the first pangs of exhaustion were already setting in. My shoulders ached from carrying heavy trays, my feet throbbed, and my shirt was clinging uncomfortably to my back. I hadn't even made it to the lunch shift, and I was already feeling the strain. This job was physically demanding in a way I hadn't anticipated, and it was humbling. I took a moment to lean against the wall near the kitchen, catching my breath. Elizabeth, a waitress I'd noticed earlier for her calm demeanor despite the chaos, sidled up beside me. She looked about my age, maybe a few years younger, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Her movements were swift and efficient, honed by years of practice, and she carried herself with a quiet resilience. "Tough first day?" she asked, her voice carrying a knowing warmth that cut through the chaos. She offered me a glass of water, and I accepted it with gratitude that went beyond just quenching my thirst. "Yeah, you could say that," I replied, gulping down the water. "It's a lot more intense than I expected." Elizabeth laughed, a short, dry sound. "Welcome to the real world, Matthew. This is what it's like for most of us every single day. And today's not even that bad. You should see it during conference season. Absolute madhouse." I nodded, trying to imagine what bad looked like if this was considered manageable. "How long have you been working here?" 5 years, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Started as a part-time gig, then it kind of Stuck. Management changes, staff turnover, but the work stays the same. The hours are long, the pay's barely enough to scrape by, and don't get me started on the health benefits, or lack thereof. I glanced around at the other staff. Helen, who was still hustling between tables despite her age. Josh, the busboy, who was nervously refilling coffee cups after his run-in with Mike earlier. And Mike himself, who looked perpetually stressed and frustrated, snapping orders that nobody seemed eager to follow. Each one of them was caught in this relentless grind, pushing through fatigue and frustration just to keep the place running. It's not just the work, you know, Elizabeth continued, her tone shifting to something more somber. It's the way we're treated. Management acts like we're all disposable. They cut hours without warning, expect us to pick up extra shifts whenever it suits them, and God forbid you get sick or need time off. Andrew's the worst. He's more interested in cutting costs than actually taking care of the people who keep this place running. Why do you stay? I asked, genuinely curious. I could see the toll it was taking on her, on all of them. Elizabeth shrugged, offering a wry smile. I've got bills to pay, and the tips are decent on good days. Besides, there's a weird kind of camaraderie here. We're all in the same boat, you know. It's not like the other places are any better. Her words stuck with me. This wasn't just a job for these people. It was their livelihood, a necessity. They put up with the grueling conditions because they didn't have a choice. And while I could walk away from this experiment whenever I wanted, they were trapped in a system that didn't value them beyond the hours they could work. I watched as Elizabeth moved back to the floor, expertly dodging a wayward guest and smoothly taking an order without missing a beat. Her resilience was admirable, but it was also heartbreaking. It was clear that the problems ran deeper than just one bad manager. The entire culture of the hotel was off, from the way staff were treated to the unrealistic expectations placed on them. It was a mess that I was only just beginning to understand. By midday, I was running on adrenaline. The lunch rush was even worse than breakfast, with guests spilling into the dining area, demanding service. I juggled orders, mixed up drink requests, and endured more than one complaint about the wait times. It was relentless, and by the end of my shift, I was drenched in sweat. My feet were screaming, and my patience was frayed. I retreated to the back room, collapsing into a chair and closing my eyes for a moment of respite. The sound of the kitchen clattered around me, pans banging, dishes clinking, and the incessant chatter of cooks and servers trying to keep up. Mike walked in, tossing his clipboard onto a nearby table with a frustrated sigh. "This place is a circus," he muttered, rubbing his temples. "Busy day," I offered, trying to gauge his mood. "Does it ever slow down?" Mike scoffed. "Slow down? Not in this place. Management's always pushing for more. More guests, more turnover, more profit. They don't care how it happens, just that it does." I hesitated, then ventured. "Have you ever thought about bringing these issues up to Andrew? Or he'll know, suggesting some changes." Mike laughed bitterly. "Andrew doesn't listen to us. He's got his orders from the top, and all he cares about is making his numbers look good. Besides, who's gonna listen to a bunch of grunts like us? We're just cogs in the machine, easily replaced." I nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of his words. This wasn't just a management issue. It was systemic, embedded in the very fabric of how the hotel operated. If this was happening here, it was likely happening across the entire chain. The problem was bigger than I'd thought, and fixing it would take more than just firing a few bad managers. As I prepared to leave for the day, I noticed Elizabeth and Helen huddled together, sharing a quick laugh over something. Despite the exhaustion etched on their faces, there was still a spark of camaraderie, a shared resilience that kept them going. It was a small, fleeting moment, but it reminded me why I was here. This wasn't just about saving my business. It was about making things right for the people who made it possible. I changed out of my uniform, slipping back into my own clothes, but I couldn't shake the weight of what I'd experienced. The harsh realities of hotel work were far removed from the glossy images I'd been sold, and the people behind those jobs were more than just names on a payroll. They were the lifeblood of the entire operation. As I walked out of the hotel, I made a silent vow. I wasn't just going to fix what was broken. I was going to rebuild it from the ground up, with the people who mattered most at the center of it all. And if that meant making some tough decisions along the way, then so be it. This was my hotel, and I was going to take it back, starting now. The next few days at the hotel were an eye-opener. I continued to work undercover as Matthew Walker, and the more I observed, the clearer it became that the issues here ran deep. Mismanagement wasn't just a problem. It was the root cause of nearly every frustration, every inefficiency, and every disillusioned employee. Andrew, the general manager, was a constant presence, a looming figure who seemed to relish his power more than his responsibilities. He was the kind of manager who watched from the sidelines, barking orders, but rarely stepping in to help when things got tough. He was quick to criticize, but slow to offer solutions, more interested in assigning blame than finding fixes. One afternoon, I caught a glimpse of just how destructive his leadership style could be. The lunch rush was in full swing, and the kitchen was backed up with orders. A mix-up with a delivery had left them short on ingredients, and tensions were running high. Elizabeth and I were hustling to keep the guests happy, but the strain was evident. We needed more hands on deck, but Andrew was nowhere to be seen. As I passed by the office, I heard Andrew's voice echoing down the hallway, raised and angry. I hesitated, then edged closer, listening in. "You think I care about your excuses?" Andrew's voice was sharp, cutting through the low hum of the busy hotel. "I don't want to hear about staffing issues or whatever nonsense you've got going on in the kitchen. Just get it done. And don't bother me with it." I peeked around the corner to see him standing in the doorway, facing Mike, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Mike's usual bravado had faded. He stood with his shoulders slumped, his expression a mix of frustration and resignation. "Andrew, we're drowning out there," Mike said, his tone careful but edged with urgency. "We need more staff. I've got half the team running double shifts, and they're burning out. It's not sustainable." Andrew folded his arms, unimpressed. "Then tell them to work faster. We're not made of money, Mike. I've got a budget to stick to, and I'm not about to blow it because the kitchen can't keep up." Mike clenched his jaw, clearly struggling to keep his cool. "It's not just about speed. We need quality, too. The guests are starting to notice. If we keep cutting corners." "Quality," Andrew interrupted with a scoff. "The guests want food on time, not a lecture on your workload. Figure it out, or I'll find someone who can." With that, Andrew turned and walked away, leaving Mike standing there, fists clenched and face flushed with anger. It was a brief exchange, but it spoke volumes. Andrew's complete disregard for the struggles of his staff was more than just poor management. It was toxic. He was running the place like a drill sergeant, where efficiency was prized above all else, including the well-being of his team. As I moved back to the dining area, Elizabeth caught up with me. She clearly overheard the exchange too. "Can you believe this guy?" she whispered, glancing around to make sure Andrew wasn't in earshot. "Mike's trying to hold it all together, and Andrew just sweeps in, throws his weight around, and walks off. No support, no solutions, just orders. It's worse than I thought," I admitted, lowering my voice. I knew things were bad, but seeing it firsthand. Andrew's approach isn't just unsustainable, it's destructive. Elizabeth nodded, her expression grim. "He's been like this for as long as I can remember. It's all about the bottom line for him. If something goes wrong, it's always someone else's fault. And the staff, we're just numbers on a spreadsheet to him." I watched as Andrew reappeared at the far end of the dining room, surveying the bustling scene with a critical eye. It was clear that he thrived on exerting control, but his version of control was all about fear. He'd created an environment where people were too afraid to speak up, too beaten down to challenge the status quo. And in his quest for perfection, he'd forgotten that his greatest asset wasn't the budget, but the people working tirelessly under his watch. I spent the rest of the day observing more closely, noting the small, telling details. The kitchen was in a near-constant state of disarray, with staff scrambling to cover gaps left by poor planning and overworked team members. Housekeeping was equally strained. I overheard one of the housekeepers, Maria, venting to a coworker about unrealistic room cleaning quotas and the lack of breaks. "It's not just one bad day," Maria said, frustration lacing her words. "It's every day. We're expected to clean 15 rooms in a shift, and if we don't hit that number, Andrew's breathing down our necks. Half of us are running on fumes, and he just keeps pushing." Her coworker, a younger girl named Lily, nodded sympathetically. "I've been here a year, and it's always been like this. The turnover is so high because people just can't handle it. They're either fired for not keeping up or they quit because it's too much." Listening to them, I felt a surge of anger. These were hard-working people, dedicated to their jobs, yet they were being pushed beyond their limits by a management team that saw them as nothing more than a means to an end. I'd built this hotel chain from the ground up, with a vision of luxury and excellence, but somewhere along the line, that vision had been corrupted by the very people I'd entrusted to carry it out. That evening, I found myself back in the staff room, mentally drained and physically exhausted. Elizabeth joined me, plopping down in the chair next to mine with a weary sigh. "Long day," she said, though it sounded more like a statement than a complaint. "Yeah," I agreed, running a hand through my hair. "I'm starting to see the bigger picture, and it's not pretty." Elizabeth studied me for a moment, then leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "You know, a lot of us have tried to make things better. We've given feedback, made suggestions, even proposed some changes that would make our jobs easier and improve service for the guests. But it's like talking to a wall. Andrew doesn't care, and no one above him seems to either." I nodded, appreciating her candor. "What kind of changes?" "Simple stuff, mostly," she said. "Better scheduling, more realistic expectations, and I don't know, maybe some actual acknowledgement of the work we do. We've got good ideas, but they're never taken seriously. Andrew's more interested in keeping costs down and his bosses off his back." I leaned back in my chair, absorbing her words. It was clear that Elizabeth wasn't just venting. She genuinely cared about the hotel and the people who worked there, and she wasn't alone. There was a wealth of untapped potential in this staff, but it was being stifled by poor leadership and a toxic culture that discouraged innovation and stifled morale. "I'm going to do something about this," I said finally, meeting her gaze. "I don't know how yet, but this has to change." Elizabeth gave me a small, hopeful smile. "Good luck with that, Matthew. You're going to need it." As I walked out of the hotel that night, Andrew's words echoed in my head. "Figure it out, or I'll find someone who can." It was ironic, really, because that's exactly what I intended to do. Figure it out, but not in the way Andrew had in mind. I was going to dig into the heart of these problems and unearth the rot that had set in. It wouldn't be easy, and I knew I'd face resistance, but I was more determined than ever. This wasn't just about salvaging a business. It was about redeeming it from the ground up. And Andrew, whether he knew it or not, was about to face the reckoning he'd been avoiding for far too long. The day I met Elizabeth was one of those moments that reshapes everything you think you know. It was late afternoon, and the hotel was caught in that lull between the lunch rush and the dinner crowd. The staff were busy preparing for the evening, moving with the efficiency of a well-rehearsed routine despite the underlying stress that seemed to hang in the air like a fog. I had been on my feet since the early morning, running errands, clearing tables, and picking up whatever tasks were thrown my way. I was exhausted, my muscles aching from the repetitive motion of lifting trays and navigating the crowded dining room. I was starting to understand the relentless grind that the staff endured day in and day out. It was humbling, and it made me realize just how far removed I had been from the reality of my own business. I was stacking glasses near the bar when I heard a soft but firm voice behind me. "You're new, right? Matthew, isn't it?" I turned around to see a young woman with a warm smile and bright, intelligent eyes. She was petite, with auburn hair tied back in a neat ponytail, and she moved with the practiced ease of someone who knew the hotel inside and out. There was something about her presence that was immediately comforting, like a lighthouse in the middle of a storm. "Yeah, that's me," I replied, offering a tired smile. "Matthew Walker, the new waiter." "I'm Elizabeth," she said, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, confident. "I've been here for a couple of years now. If you need any help or if you're trying to figure out the ropes, just let me know." "Thanks, I appreciate it," I said, glancing around the bustling room. "It's a lot to take in." Elizabeth chuckled, nodding knowingly. "It is. This place can be a bit of a madhouse, especially under Andrew's watch. But you get used to it, I guess, or you quit. Most people do the latter." I laughed, though it was more out of recognition than humor. "Yeah, I've noticed. It's chaotic." "That's one word for it," she said, picking up a tray of glasses and expertly balancing it on her shoulder. "Honestly, it didn't used to be this bad. When I first started, things were tough, but we had a sense of teamwork, you know. It felt like we were all in it together. But Andrew, well, he's kind of killed that vibe." I watched as she set the tray down with a practiced motion, her expression briefly clouding as she mentioned Andrew. It was clear she had seen more than her fair share of mismanagement and had learned to navigate it with a mix of resilience and quiet defiance. "What keeps you here, then?" I asked, genuinely curious. "If it's so bad, why stick around?" Elizabeth shrugged, her smile returning but tinged with a hint of sadness. "Honestly, the people. Not the management, obviously, but the staff. There's a real sense of camaraderie when you get past the stress and the crappy pay. We look out for each other. And I guess I just keep hoping things will get better." She paused, looking at me thoughtfully. "I've tried to suggest changes, little things that could make a big difference, but Andrew's not exactly open to feedback. He's more about the numbers, the efficiency metrics, and less about the human side of things. It's frustrating, but I try to make the best of it." I nodded, feeling a pang of guilt. This was my hotel, my responsibility, and yet here was Elizabeth, someone who was doing more to keep the spirit of the place alive than I had in recent years. Her quiet determination and willingness to push back against the tide were qualities I admired immediately. As we continued talking, Elizabeth began to share more about her experiences. She told me stories about the guests, the quirks of the hotel's layout, and the little hacks she'd developed to make her job easier. She had a knack for seeing things that others overlooked, finding solutions to problems before they even surfaced. It was clear she cared deeply about her work and about the people she worked with. At one point, she stopped mid-sentence, glancing over at a young housekeeper struggling with a heavy cart. "Hey, Lily," she called out, jogging over to help. "Here, let me give you a hand with that." I watched as Elizabeth seamlessly stepped in, helping Lily maneuver the cumbersome cart around a tight corner. She didn't have to help. It wasn't her job, but she did it anyway, without hesitation or complaint. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about her character. As she returned, she flashed me an apologetic smile. "Sorry about that. Lily's new, and these carts are a pain until you get used to them." "No worries," I said, genuinely impressed. "You really go out of your way for everyone, don't you?" Elizabeth shrugged again, though this time her smile was a little brighter. "Someone has to. We're all in this together, right? Besides, it makes the day go by faster when you're not just stuck in your own head, you know." I nodded, absorbing her words. In Elizabeth, I saw the kind of employee every business dreams of having: dedicated, empathetic, and willing to go above and beyond for the sake of her colleagues. It was people like her who kept the heart of this place beating, even when everything else seemed to be falling apart. Before long, Elizabeth and I fell into a routine of sorts. She would fill me in on the nuances of the hotel, pointing out the little details that made all the difference. And in return, I found myself opening up, sharing my observations, and slowly letting her in on my own thoughts about how things could be improved. One afternoon, as we were taking a brief break in the staff room, Elizabeth turned to me, her expression more serious than usual. "You know," she began, her voice thoughtful, "I've been thinking a lot about this place, about how it could be better. It's not just about Andrew, though he's a big part of the problem. It's the whole culture here. People are scared to speak up because they don't feel valued. They don't think anyone cares." I nodded, agreeing wholeheartedly. "Yeah, I've noticed that too. It's like there's this invisible barrier keeping everyone from connecting. And that barrier is Andrew." Elizabeth looked at me, her eyes searching. "What about you, Matthew? You've been here a while now, and you've seen the worst of it. What would you change if you could?" I hesitated for a moment, then decided to be honest. "I think it starts with listening, actually hearing what people have to say, and then acting on it. It's like you said, the staff have good ideas. They just need a chance to be heard." Elizabeth nodded, her expression softening. "Exactly. It's not rocket science, is it? Treat people with respect, give them a voice, and watch how things change." As we finished our break and headed back to the floor, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Elizabeth's words had lit a fire within me, reigniting the passion I'd once had for this business. She had shown me that the heart of the hotel wasn't in its luxurious rooms or its prime location, but in its people. And if I wanted to turn things around, I needed to start from there, with the employees who were the true backbone of this place. Meeting Elizabeth wasn't just a coincidence. It was a wake-up call. She reminded me of the values I had built my empire on, and how far I'd strayed from them. I knew then that I couldn't just stand by and watch as everything I'd worked for was slowly eroded by poor leadership and neglect. I had to take action, and Elizabeth had given me the clarity to see the path forward. As the shift wound down, and I watched Elizabeth move through the dining room, greeting guests with her genuine smile, and helping her coworkers with effortless grace, I realized something important. This wasn't just about fixing a hotel. It was about restoring a community, one that had been neglected for far too long. And with Elizabeth's help, I was ready to make that change, one step at a time. The next few days were a whirlwind of long shifts, back-to-back tasks, and mounting frustrations. But there was something different this time. My undercover mission had shifted from simply observing the day-to-day operations to actively engaging with the people who made the hotel run. I found myself not just working alongside the staff, but truly connecting with them, understanding their struggles, and witnessing firsthand the toll that the mismanagement had taken on their morale. Elizabeth's insights weighed heavily on my mind. Her words had reignited a sense of responsibility within me. It was clear that if anything was going to change, I needed to step up, even if it meant risking my cover. Every day, I saw dedicated employees trying to do their best under oppressive circumstances. Their resilience, despite the lack of recognition and support, inspired me. One morning, I arrived at the hotel earlier than usual. The lobby was quiet, the air filled with the faint scent of fresh coffee brewing in the cafe. I made my way to the staff break room, where a few early risers were already gathered, nursing their first cups of the day. Elizabeth was there, chatting with a couple of housekeepers. She waved me over, her eyes bright despite the early hour. "Morning, Matthew," she greeted with her usual warmth. "Early start today." "Yeah, couldn't sleep," I replied, grabbing a cup of coffee. "Too much on my mind, I guess." Elizabeth raised an eyebrow, giving me a knowing look. "I know that feeling. This place has a way of creeping into your thoughts, doesn't it?" "More than I expected," I admitted, taking a sip of my coffee. "It's been eye-opening, to say the least." We chatted briefly before she headed off to start her shift. As I watched her go, I felt a renewed sense of determination. I couldn't just stand by and let the toxic culture continue. I needed to take action, to show the staff that someone cared, even if they didn't yet know who I really was. Later that day, I found myself in the kitchen during a particularly busy lunch rush. The chefs were working at a frenzied pace, and the heat from the stoves made the air feel thick and oppressive. Orders were flying in faster than they could be fulfilled, and the stress was palpable. "Order up. Where's the runner?" one of the chefs shouted, his voice tinged with frustration. A young waiter scrambled to grab the plates, but it was clear he was overwhelmed. I stepped in, picking up a tray and loading the orders myself. As I moved through the kitchen, I could feel the tension easing slightly. Just by stepping in and helping, I was able to make a small difference, even if only for a moment. The staff's gratitude was evident in their nods and brief smiles, and it fueled my resolve. As I set the plates down at a table in the dining room, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "You're not afraid to get your hands dirty, are you?" I turned to see Carla, one of the senior waitresses, watching me with a bemused expression. She was a tough, no-nonsense type who had been with the hotel for years and had seen more than her fair share of ups and downs. "Just trying to help out where I can," I said, wiping my brow with the back of my hand. Carla smirked, crossing her arms. Most new guys wouldn't jump into the chaos like that, especially not without being told. "You sure you're just a waiter?" I chuckled, a little nervously. I got a thing for efficiency. And well, I guess I'm a bit of a perfectionist. Perfectionist, huh? Carla raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying my casual demeanor. "Well, keep it up. We could use more hands like yours around here." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words. There was so much potential here, so much untapped talent and dedication. But it was all being squandered under the current management. Every small action I took seemed to make a difference, and that only strengthened my resolve to see this through. As the day went on, I made a point to check in with other employees, asking how they were doing and if there was anything I could do to help. I listened to their grievances, no matter how small, and did my best to offer solutions. Whether it was adjusting a shift schedule to accommodate a family obligation or simply acknowledging someone's hard work, I realized that these little gestures could have a big impact. In the middle of the afternoon, I ran into Elizabeth again. She was refilling salt and pepper shakers at one of the side stations, her brow furrowed in concentration. I approached, feeling the need to share my growing determination. "Elizabeth," I said, leaning against the counter beside her, "I've been thinking about what you said. The ideas, the need for change. You're right. Things can't stay like this." She looked up, her expression softening into a smile. "I'm glad to hear that, Matthew. But talk is cheap around here. We've heard promises of change before, but it never sticks." "I know," I said, meeting her gaze. "But I'm not just talking. I want to do something about it. I've seen enough to know that things have to change. And not just the big stuff, but the little things too. The way people are treated, the way feedback is handled. It all matters." Elizabeth nodded, her eyes reflecting a mix of hope and skepticism. "You're different, Matthew. I can tell, but you'll need more than good intentions to turn this place around. Andrew has a tight grip on the staff, and most people are too scared to speak up. That's why I need your help," I said earnestly. "You've got the respect of the staff. They listen to you. If we work together, maybe we can start to shift things, even if it's just a little at a time." Elizabeth studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, I'm in. But let's be smart about this. Small changes, little victories. If we try to do too much too fast, Andrew will catch on." "Agreed," I said, feeling a surge of optimism. One step at a time. With Elizabeth on board, my determination solidified. This was no longer just about observing or gathering information. It was about making a tangible difference. And with each passing day, I found myself more and more committed to turning things around, not just for the sake of the business, but for the people who had given so much of themselves to keep it running. I knew there would be challenges ahead, and that Andrew wouldn't take kindly to my meddling. But I was ready. The staff deserved better, and I was going to do everything in my power to make that a reality. The weeks following my decision to address the toxic culture at the hotel were filled with subtle but significant changes. The atmosphere started to shift, with small improvements in efficiency and morale. Yet the positive changes were not without their challenges. The biggest hurdle was Andrew, the general manager, whose mismanagement had been at the root of so many issues. Andrew was a large man, with a demeanor to match his stature. He exuded a sense of authority that was often more oppressive than empowering. He didn't take kindly to disruptions in his carefully controlled system, and my under-the-radar attempts to implement changes had not gone unnoticed. One afternoon, I was in the staff lounge, helping a couple of new hires with their paperwork when Andrew stormed in. His face was set in a grim line, and his eyes scanned the room with an air of suspicion. I could feel the tension rise as he walked over, his heavy footsteps echoing on the tiled floor. "Matthew," he said sharply, his voice cutting through the casual chatter. "A word with you." I nodded, setting aside the clipboard I'd been working on. "Sure, Andrew. What's up?" Andrew motioned for me to follow him to a quieter corner of the lounge. His eyes bore into me as he began speaking in a low, intense tone. "I've noticed some changes around here. Things aren't running as smoothly as they used to." I took a deep breath, knowing that this conversation was coming. I've been trying to address some of the issues that staff have brought up. I thought it might help improve things. Andrew's expression hardened. "And you think you're qualified to make those changes? You're just a waiter, Matthew. You don't know the first thing about managing a hotel." "I'm aware of my position," I replied calmly, "but I've been observing and talking to the staff. There are real problems that need addressing. If you take their feedback seriously, you might see what I mean." Andrew's eyes flashed with irritation. "Feedback? You think you know better than me? I've been running this hotel for years. I know how to get results. It's not about knowing better," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "It's about acknowledging that there are issues that need to be addressed. The staff are the ones who deal with these problems every day." Andrew's face reddened. "I don't have time for this. If you're going to disrupt my operation, you'd better have a good reason. And from where I stand, all I see are inefficiencies and complaints." His words stung, but I held my ground. "I believe the issues are deeper than you think. Maybe we should work together to find a solution, rather than dismissing the staff's concerns outright." Andrew's jaw tightened. "I don't need some outsider telling me how to run my hotel. If you have issues, you can take them up with me directly, but don't expect me to roll over because you think you've got all the answers." The conversation ended with Andrew walking away, his frustration evident. I knew he was a formidable opponent, but I was determined to press on. The staff deserved better, and I couldn't let Andrew's resistance deter me. Later that day, I found Elizabeth in the break room, looking pensive as she sipped her coffee. I joined her, leaning against the counter. "Hey, Elizabeth, I just had a run-in with Andrew. He's not happy about the changes." Elizabeth sighed, setting her cup down. "I figured as much. Andrew doesn't like his authority challenged. He's been running this place with an iron fist for too long." "But what happened?" I filled her in on the conversation. Elizabeth listened attentively, her expression a mix of concern and frustration. "I knew it wouldn't be easy," she said finally. "Andrew's not the type to take kindly to criticism, especially from someone he sees as just a waiter." "I'm starting to realize that," I admitted, "but I can't back down now. I've seen too many problems and too much potential for things to improve. If we let Andrew's attitude dictate our actions, nothing will ever change." Elizabeth nodded, her determination mirroring mine. "You're right. We need to keep pushing, even if it means facing more conflicts with Andrew. The staff are counting on us." The next few days were tense. Andrew's demeanor grew colder, and he began scrutinizing every move I made. It became clear that he was monitoring my actions closely, looking for any excuse to shut down the changes I was trying to implement. One day, as I was working in the lobby, I overheard a conversation between Andrew and one of the senior staff members, Carla. Andrew's voice was low but filled with menace. "Carla, I need to know what's going on with this new guy," Andrew said. "He's stirring up trouble, and I want to be prepared." Carla's voice was steady, though I could sense the underlying tension. "Matthew's been working hard and trying to address some issues with the staff. I don't think he's trying to undermine you, Andrew. He just wants to help." "Help?" Andrew's tone was scornful. "He's not here to help. He's here to disrupt. And if he's not careful, he'll find himself out of a job. I won't tolerate insubordination." I knew the situation was escalating. Andrew's hostility was clear, and it was only a matter of time before things came to a head. I needed to stay focused on my goal, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to navigate the growing conflict. That evening, as I finished my shift and prepared to leave, Elizabeth found me in the parking lot. Her face was set with determination, and she spoke in hushed tones. "Matthew, I've been thinking," she said. "We need to be strategic about this. Andrew's not going to back down easily, and if we push too hard, we could end up losing everything we've worked for." "I agree," I said, feeling the weight of her words. "But we can't let him intimidate us. We need to keep working on the small changes. And maybe, just maybe, we can start to turn things around." Elizabeth nodded. "We'll need to be smart about how we approach this. It's a battle, but we're not alone. The staff are with us, and if we stay united, we have a chance." As we parted ways, I felt a renewed sense of resolve. The conflict with Andrew was far from over, but I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The path to change was never easy, but with the support of Elizabeth and the rest of the staff, I knew we had a fighting chance. As the tension in the hotel reached a boiling point, I knew that the time had come to end my charade. Andrew's suspicion had grown so intense that it was only a matter of time before he uncovered my true identity. I could no longer afford to stay hidden in the shadows. The risk of losing everything I had worked for was too great. I needed to confront the situation head-on. It was a quiet afternoon in the hotel lobby when Andrew made his move. He had called for a meeting with the senior staff, and I was informed that I was expected to attend. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation and unease as I made my way to the conference room. Inside, the senior staff were already assembled, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. Andrew stood at the head of the table, his posture rigid and authoritative. As I took my seat, he wasted no time in getting to the point. "Thank you all for coming," Andrew began, his tone clipped. "We have a situation that needs addressing. There have been disruptions in the hotel's operations, and it's time we got to the bottom of them." I glanced around the room, noting the wary looks exchanged among the staff. I could sense the mounting tension as Andrew's gaze locked onto me. "Matthew," Andrew said, his voice carrying a note of controlled anger, "you've been at the center of these disruptions. I think it's time for some answers." I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind countless times, but now that it was here, I felt a rush of adrenaline. "Andrew," I began, "there's something you need to know. I'm not just a waiter." Andrew's eyes narrowed. "Oh, and what exactly are you implying?" "I'm Matthew Anderson," I said, holding his gaze steadily. "I'm the owner of this hotel chain." A stunned silence fell over the room. Andrew's face went through a series of emotions: shock, disbelief, and finally, anger. He struggled to regain his composure, his voice shaking slightly as he spoke. "You're the owner," Andrew spat. "So this whole charade was your doing. You've been undermining me this entire time." "I was trying to understand the real issues here," I said calmly. "I wanted to see things from the staff's perspective. The feedback I received revealed serious problems with the way the hotel is being managed." Andrew's face flushed with rage. "You think you know better than me. I've dedicated years to this hotel. I'm not about to be judged by someone who pretended to be one of the staff." It's not about judging you personally, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's about addressing the systemic issues that are affecting both the staff and the guests. The way you've been running things has created a toxic environment, and that needs to change. The senior staff exchanged nervous glances, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation. Elizabeth, who had been sitting quietly at the back of the room, finally spoke up. "Andrew," she said, her voice steady but firm, "Matthew's right. We've been trying to make improvements, but you've been blocking every suggestion and treating us unfairly. It's time for a change." Andrew's anger boiled over. "You've all been part of this insurrection. I won't stand for it. If you think you can just overthrow me and take over, you're sorely mistaken." I stood up, meeting Andrew's furious gaze with a sense of resolve. "I'm not here to overthrow anyone. I'm here to make things better for everyone involved. But if you can't work with us to create a positive environment, then we'll have to make some difficult decisions." Andrew's face was a mask of fury and disbelief. "You think you can just come in and fix everything with a few changes? You're delusional." Elizabeth stepped forward, her voice filled with determination. "It's not just about a few changes. It's about creating a supportive and respectful workplace. We're all committed to that goal, and we won't back down." The room was filled with a heavy silence as Andrew struggled to process the situation. His authority had been undermined, and he was losing control. I knew that this was a turning point, and the decisions made in the coming hours would determine the future of the hotel. Andrew's shoulders slumped slightly, his anger giving way to a sense of defeat. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "Do what you want, but don't expect me to be a part of it." With that, Andrew stormed out of the room, leaving the staff and me to process the aftermath. I could see the mixture of relief and apprehension on the faces of the senior staff. The battle was far from over, but the first step had been taken. Elizabeth approached me, a faint smile on her lips. "You did it. Now we just need to follow through and make sure the changes we started continue." I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "We will. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but we're in this together." As the meeting came to a close, I felt a renewed sense of hope. The path to transforming the hotel was clear, and with the support of the staff, I was determined to see it through. The challenges ahead were daunting, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were on the brink of real change.